Well, welcome to the next installment of the Kanban University Distinguished Fellows Program. I'm Todd Little, Chairman of Kanban University, and I have the privilege of having Andy Carmichael here as our next interview. So Andy, welcome. Great to have you. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, nobody's ever called me distinguished before, Todd. I think actually there's one occasion when somebody called me distinguished, which was having dinner with some colleagues, and the waiter came over and to our table and said to me, he said, "Would the distinguished gentleman like to choose the wine?" And I said, "What, you mean the old guy?" So I'm pleased to hear that you're giving some younger fellows, and well, it's not just that I'm old, It's a great privilege to be here, and I've been involved in Kanban. I was looking at it actually about 10 years, just under 10 years in fact, when some people on the project I was working on said, I think some of the problems that we're dealing with could do with a Kanban solution. And I thought, I don't actually know what that is in terms of the Kanban method. And so that's where I started getting involved and looking into it in more detail. And it's been a great journey since then.
Well, that's great. That's a great introduction to how about yourself and how you got introduced to Kanban. So about 10 years, this is the 10th anniversary of Kanban University. How have you seen Kanban evolve and the Kanban community evolve over those 10 years you've been involved?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think I was involved at that time in a very large Scrum project. They couldn't afford, because they had something like 100 Scrum teams in this company, and they couldn't afford to have to actually pay, because at that time Scrum Master was a premium role. I think unless you at least say you're a coach or something, it doesn't work these days. But at that time, they couldn't afford to put Scrum Masters in, so they got some people like me to be lead Scrum Masters, and not a role that really exists, but that's what we were, to basically help in project managers in this company try and use Scrum over a very, very large transformation project, which had some very interesting problems. And as always in those kinds of projects, you find that you learn more than you teach, and certainly was a big learning experience for me in terms of applying Agile principles at scale, and what the limitations of that. And clearly there were some very significant problems in how this company even understood what being Agile might be. And so it was a real incentive for me to look into Kanban in more detail at that point. And I think Kanban has always been, in the Agile community and in general in management techniques, a small and slightly off to the side. Now, over the 10 years that I've been involved, I think that has changed significantly. You could say it's become more mature. No pun intended, but the maturity model has given coaches a very real way to engage with companies and with the way that they are delivering services to customers. And so that has come through in lots of different ways in terms of how people are now using it worldwide. So I think that maturity, the depth of implementations of Kanban that I've seen over that period, have grown and become more significant. And there's a very, very good body of knowledge in terms of, a wide range of modern management techniques, to use that phrase, rather than just what Kanban probably means to a majority of people who've heard of it, which is some sort of flow system or logistical management technique for managing the flow of work. And so actually seeing that breadth of and depth of the Kanban body of knowledge has been, a really good part of the journey.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's a good perspective you have on how really not necessarily what we might say the Kanban community, but the Agile community in general has grown up to appreciate the values that Kanban has always had, and have brought about their own maturity, really. And now they're saying, hey, look, we could use some of that Kanban stuff here, and have started doing that and appreciating it. So that's great.
Yeah.
And along that lines, I mean, part of it is getting them educated about what Kanban is. You are the author, along with David J. Anderson, of The Essential Kanban Condensed. It's a great book that has helped a lot of people in their Kanban journey. Is there anything in particular about the book that you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, I suppose, it came out in 2016, so it's not a new book. And but I think it's still very useful because it came out of my journey as much as anything, having done, Kanban University training and particularly the masterclass with David Anderson. I was keen to get out, well, for myself initially, but also for the people I'm working with, some sort of definition of what Kanban is, because there's a lot of, at that stage it's probably even more than now, but it's not gone away. There's this agile method and this agile method, and this one is for this, or does it in this way, and this one is for that. But people were generally arguing about Kanban without knowing what on earth it was, unless they happened to have done Kanban University training, and even then, they maybe didn't understand what the scope of the method was. So the idea of that book, in sort of 40 pages, it's a condensed is really the key word in that title, to get a view of the scope of what the method is. It's not just about flow systems and managing flow with data, or the analogy of using lean and Toyota manufacturing techniques in knowledge work, knowledge systems, software development, for example. It's a wide range of techniques and principles and general practices that it's worth trying to summarize in as short a space as we could. So we certainly kept it short, and part of the reason for that, we might thought there might be a long book, but I think it's part of limiting work in progress is that a lot of books have come out, and David in particular has done quite a lot of books over that period. So the longer book never came out, but the value of having that short but broad view of what Kanban is, I think is still very useful. And certainly, so it came out of really, I would like David to tell me what he thought is the essential elements of Kanban. What does he view as the sort of boundaries of, well, the minimum scope that you can define for Kanban? And it is much broader than most people think. So that's why putting it in 40 pages plus a glossary makes it a pretty dense book. But I think it's useful. It's useful to be able to read, what is trying to show the scope of the method, not explain everything, not give examples in every case, but to understand what the scope of the method is and how it's broader than, most people. It's like, the story of the elephant. You come across an elephant and blind, is it a Gandhi story talking about elephants? Some people think it's like a tree because they've got a leg, and some people think it's like a snake because they've got the trunk or the tail. It's bigger than what most people experience in the first few years of coming across Kanban or using it in practice. And so that was the idea of the book, and it's good. And it's good now, just recently, to see. There's a couple of things that are very much complementary. Kanban Guide, which is, that beginner's guide. Essential Kanban Condensed was never a beginner's guide, really, although it's quite useful when you start, but it's not a beginner's guide to it, not an introduction. Which Kanban Guide, which Kanban University have published this year, is that introduction to people to get what it is that Kanban's talking about. And also recently, three guys have done a workbook to accompany Essential Kanban Condensed, which is Essential Kanban Illustrated Workbook, and that is a really good way of interacting with that material and using it as a way of learning alongside training or alongside reading the book or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's a great point you make there, is that Essential Kanban Condensed is really, it's distilled and it's sort of the root Bible, sort of all the condensed pieces, and the guides are there as well to help you. And now we've got the illustrated condensed, which is another piece to help. And then there's David's book on David and Theodora Bosa's book on the Kanban Maturity Model, which is really the describing all the practices. So it's really there. It's very well described, and we do have the full elephant now, all there. So it's excellent. So how are you using Kanban now? Which I know you're winding down a little bit in your work.
Yes, well, I've recently changed my profile to describe my job title as Kanban Guide, which is, I'm not a book, but I think where people need that guide to, how they're thinking about applying Kanban, how they're thinking about doing, I'm probably a good person to talk to and sound ideas off. So I tend to do more short-term assignments. I'm still doing some training, but in a limited way. And so that's a lot of what I do. I've recently worked with a hospital, and it sort of started before COVID and went through some of the period with COVID where they were changing their IT supplier. And again, one of these transformation projects where lots of things come together and make it much more complicated than it needs to be. But that was great, actually, to sort of see in a very important area, a very critical area of healthcare at this point in time, and seeing how to apply this flow of work going through the system, because the temptation of people to use project paradigms to try and understand continual flow of work, and doing the most important thing, priority is meant to be a singular word, not your priorities, but what's the next most important thing to do. And so trying to bring those kinds of principles into there, as well as giving them, the basic training in how to use it. So those sort of things are the kind of projects that get involved. Another thing I'm involved with Kanban University is the accredited Kanban consultant, AKC program, which from my point of view is a really important way of communicating Kanban to the world, because unlike other methods, you need an army, like the client I mentioned with hundreds of Scrum teams, they're an army of consultants coming in to help them apply it. Very often, it's a few people like me and other Kanban consultants and coaches that can work with a very large group, and the company themselves can implement the incremental and evolutionary transformation of their business to see this flow of value improve. And so it's the accredited Kanban consultants, which is the highest accreditation in Kanban University. How do we get these are the people that can get into companies. They're well educated in the Kanban body of knowledge, but they've also got accredited experience of doing it. So how to improve that flow of work, if you like, of potential AKCs through to an international body of them working across. I think that is going to see, particularly as it's the AKCs themselves that can identify who should be the next AKCs in their work environment. And they can also help in terms of the assessment of experience and the interviews and the mentoring that goes on to transform coaches into that higher level of consulting in the business. So I really, I'm really keen on that program and seeing that program go to a much higher volume in terms of spreading a mature level of Kanban coaching across companies.
Yeah, that's great. It is an excellent program, and thanks for your help on that. And it is about we want more and increase the volume, the number of accredited consultants. At the same time, we need to maintain very high standards, right? And so we need to make sure that we've got a program that develops that and helps mentor. And I know you've been involved in helping that area. So thanks very much for that. It's been great conversation, and I really appreciate it. Congratulations on being a distinguished fellow. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you, Kanban University.